Hello, and welcome to the Heartland Institute of Financial Education's webinar on what juniors need to know, or what grade 11 students need to know if you are over in Canada. We are so glad that you could be with us today. The junior year, the 11th grade year, is such an important time. Really, this is the time where things really start to come together for our students and families. This is the time when we're pulling together our application materials, finalizing where we want to go to school, what we want to major in, what we want our careers to be, all of those types of things. And so we're going to take some time today to really go over step by step what those major areas are and how you can best utilize working with HIFA, the coach if you're already enrolled in the program, or ways to be enrolled in the program to start working with a coach. We're so glad that you are here today, and we hope you enjoy your time with us. This webinar is really going to focus on several different areas, some more in depth than others, but we're really going to focus on really looking at that, exploring and deciding a major. We do want that to really start to be solidified in the junior year because that's going to play a big role in deciding where the student wants to apply for school. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about what that cost may be when we are changing majors midstream. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on, and then really finalizing the schools to apply to in all of the different ways that we can really start looking at what's the best fit for the student and their family. What are the admissions requirements? Really looking at those pieces. What are the deadlines? What is the freshman profile, the incoming class for that college or university? What has that looked like over the past couple of years? And how do you as the student fit into that? And we'll talk a little bit about the types of schools, the stretch schools and the safe schools that we want students to really start applying for. And then lastly, we're going to focus on financial aid and really start looking at that. Many of the financial aid options or opportunities are really going to start making themselves available at some point in the junior year, closer to the end of the junior year and into grade 12 or the senior year. So we're going to talk through all of those pieces today. Exploring and deciding on a major, and really what that means is looking at the types of career that the student wants to go into. What does that career field look like? What does that work entail? And how can we best get them there? And that's going to be through deciding on a major. There's a number of ways that HIFA does that. In working with the coach, there's a couple of different platforms that we utilize. Cooter here in the US and also Blueprint in Canada is really a place where the interest, skills, and work values of the student is really assessed. And both of those platforms really give information on what that student is interested in, what strengths and gifts they're bringing to the table, and what they really value when they think about work. Oftentimes we have started working with students in the 8th grade or 9th grade, and so we would suggest that as we get closer and especially into this junior year, there's an opportunity to retake these assessments and to see where things have changed. People have been exposed to different experiences, they've visited different campuses, they've had job shadowing experiences. Those types of things can really influence what people value and potentially what they're interested in. Outside of Cooter and Blueprint, there are several other assessments, and these are always evolving. So we as a coaching team really work together to say, hey, I have a student who may be interested in XYZ as a major or potentially a career. What are some other types of assessments so we can really start to narrow that down? So we have a number of those that are at our disposal, and that really helps students broaden their perspective, find different language for different careers, different majors, things like that, that are really going to speak to who they are. Again, these assessments are going to help us really figure out what possible careers are. Students may, for instance, say, I'm really interested in medical. That has a lot of different things that fall under that medical umbrella. Same for education, same for business. Business is a broad umbrella, and many, many, many others. But really looking at students, and we really want to tie those career interests to their assessment results. If it looks like they are a very linear thinker, or if they're very creative, how does that really translate into a career? What are the tasks that are required? What are those specific jobs? What does that entail for them? What would their day-to-day look like? And both Blueprint and Cooter have a lot of information in there for students to kind of play around and start looking at what those day-to-day activities are going to look like for them, as well as what education is required. Oftentimes we're looking at postgraduate work, especially for the medical field and some of those management positions. So is that a master's degree program? Is it a PhD or an EDD, which are doctorate programs? Is it a Juris Doctorate, a law school program? Those types of things. So we really kind of start looking at that so students have a realistic view of what their path is in front of them. Also really looking at that salary, much like we've talked about in other webinars, looking at the financial aid and making college or university possible. We also want students to be able to have a livable wage when they graduate and be able to pay back any loans or things like that that they want to do. Again, those assessments really give us an opportunity to look at what students are interested in, both for a major and for a career, and then looking at, okay, these are the top 3 to 5 to 10 careers that have come up for you. Let's start looking at what that means day to day. We really want to find that sweet spot between what they're really interested and passionate about and what is going to be sustainable as it comes to the financial piece of it. And again, looking at that job outlook, as some jobs are being phased out and a lot of technological jobs are being phased in, what does that really look like in 5 or 10 years? Again, dependent upon what the education requirements are and at what level, the student has started. If we're looking at a junior, at the earliest, we're looking at 6 years out. We're probably looking at more like 6 to 8 years out. And you can add a few years out for that if we're looking at adding that postgraduate work. And so once we kind of really start working at basically the what do you want to be when you grow up question, and really working with students on what that means for them, then we work backwards and say, okay, if you want to have a career in this specific field, what are the different majors and academic plans that are going to support that in college? High school, sometimes that matters a little bit, but what we're really focusing on, and we're going to talk about that in a little while and have talked about that in other ways, really what the high school experience is doing is setting them up for their college entrance. So for the application process that we're going to touch on in a little bit. So as we start looking at, so a lot of the things that when we work with students on, they say, I'm interested in the medical field. Okay. Depending upon what that is, that's really going to look at heavy sciences in the undergraduate and the bachelor area. If we're looking at business, what type of business are you looking at, and really pulling in, looking at management classes and some of those financial pieces, as well as accounting and those different types of tracks. If we're looking at education, what type of education, what type of experience do you need outside of that? So really helping students kind of walk backwards through that. And as we've talked about before in some other areas, really doing this work and front loading this as we're applying to college, and then really making those decisions in the senior year, but really backing that up to junior year on what they want to do when they leave college or university and what they're going to be studying. The average cost for a year at a college or university average is about $20,000. Now, obviously, you're going to have some that are going to cost, excuse me, a little bit less, and some that are going to cost quite a bit more. So again, we're saying average. And so a lot of times when we see students changing majors, they don't always do that in the best way. And so oftentimes that's going to add on another semester, another year, or multiple years of that. So if you're looking at that $20,000 as the baseline for what that's going to cost, you're looking at upwards of $20,000 to $40,000 for a change of major. So the more that we can get clear on that and get clarity around what students may want to do, earlier on, so in junior year, that's going to make it that much easier on them later on. As students start deciding where they want to be applying and where they want to put their focus and energy on over the next year to a year and a half, depending upon when they're starting this process, one of the best places to go and get information for that specific college or university that they may be interested in is the specific website for that college or university. And really looking at the freshman profile, the profile for the incoming class for the last couple of years. Depending on when they're looking at this, they may not have the most recent year data available, but the first few years past that there is going to be available. And so it's really going to start telling them things like what's the average GPA, what's the SAT or ACT information, if that is applicable, what is the percentage, the average percentage of students that were accepted into that first year incoming class. What is the diversity? What is the demographic makeup of that college or university? And also, what importance are they placing on diversity and inclusion? What is the acceptance rate? We have some colleges and universities that are out there that have a 6% acceptance rates. And so these are things to really start looking at. And so as you can see on the slide here, this is a Boston College example that was recently pulled. And so this is a way that a lot of students are going to see this information. This is really just meant to start giving you the bigger picture of what you're looking at, the type of institution that you're may be interested, may not be interested. And as we start looking at what the application process is going to look like, some of these pieces really are going to play into that. These are also a really great starting place for conversations with your HIFA coach around, is it likely that I would get into this institution? What does it take to get into this institution? Well, the institutions are telling us what it looks like to get into their institution. And so it's a really, really great place to go to get that information. And if for whatever reason you have any questions on their specific sites, they're a great resource to call, typically their admissions office, which is where you're going to find this information anyhow, and get some clarification around whatever question you might have around some of the percentages and numbers. Sometimes can be the confusing piece of it. So give them a call and say, hey, I was looking on your website, it said X, Y, and Z, and I had a question about that, and get clarity around that, as opposed to just making assumptions about what that means, because this is going to play a big role into where you're deciding where you're going to apply. As you've started looking at creating this larger list of schools that you may want to look at, obviously you want to have a place where you want to compile that information. You want to start pulling all of these things together. You can work with your coach on this. We have templates that we can use to help families and students start really gathering that information and keeping it in one spot, as opposed to different pieces of paper all over the place, or I think I talked to somebody about this or about that. We want you to start keeping this in whatever way works for you. We have some different templates that will help look at that. And so really, again, building it from the specific college or university's website. And then there are some other sites that are out there, including Blueprint and Cooter, that is going to have some different information on there, including kind of what the minimum grade point average is for either the GPA or percentage, depending on where you're at, for admission. So they have some of these baseline foundational pieces. What are some required courses? Most colleges and universities are going to put this out there if you have a specific required course, specifically if you're getting into a specific school or major at that college or university. And so you're going to have to look at what those required courses are. Those are sometimes things you can take at a community or junior college prior to going to school there, or it's something that you would need to do once you're there in your freshman year. And then what admission exams are required. Is it the SAT subject exams, the ACT, and what type of writing portion for the exam? So they're going to tell you if they have a preference. One, if it's necessary, if it's required. Two, if they have a preference over the different exams. And then really what that minimum score needs to be. And so they're going to tell you these things. And so this is really great information to get very early on, especially because in your junior year is when you're going to be taking these entrance exams. And so you want to be prepared. You want to know how much you need to study and prepare for these tests so you can get at least the minimum requirement, if not obviously much higher. So as you've worked with your coach or with your family and friends on creating this large list of schools and universities that you may want to attend, we've now started to narrow that down with what does that incoming class look like? Do I fit there? Does that seem like it's something, excuse me, that I would fit into academically, demographically, those types of things? And something that we've talked about in some other webinars, and I know our coaches talk about quite a bit, is really looking at visiting as many of these colleges and universities that you're interested in as possible. Having conversations with students, faculty, and staff on campus or virtually if you're unable to visit. And that's going to start helping us to narrow down and finalizing the schools to apply to. So as we start pulling all of that information together, what is the minimum requirements? What is the feel for that? We're going to start categorizing out. We're going to start breaking these out into 3 different areas. As you can see on the slide here, we're talking 1 or 2 stretch schools. So this is, again, based on some of those kind of hard facts there. What is the minimum GPA or percentage, as well as the entrance exams? What is their acceptance rate, those types of things. So these are schools that would the student really, really wants to attend, but you may not be accepted because one or more of these items that are kind of the minimum requirements or looks like the majority of students have based on that freshman profile may not show up for you. And so, but we still want to try. There's, maybe 3 out of 5 or 6 out of 10, something like that, that we really just want to put ourselves out there and stretch for that. So that's going to be in our 1 or 2 stretch schools to apply to. The next category are these 2 great schools. These are schools that students really want to attend, and based on those kind of hard facts, you have a really good chance of being accepted. And then in the last category there is really that safe school. This is everything is checked off for you. Maybe it's not your dream school, but it's something that you would be okay with attending. Some of the things as we're thinking about when we're finalizing the schools to apply to is first and foremost is, do they have the major that's going to get to the career that I want? And so all of these, whether they're stretch, great, or safe schools, they should have majors that are going to lead you to the career that you are interested in. And you're going to know that you're interested in that and have some skill around that due to the assessment that you're working with your coach on. So that's one of the main things that really needs to be in there. And then you start looking at the grade pieces, right? The GPA or the percentage, as well as the entrance exams. And then you're going to also start looking at some of the application requirements, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. So these are really where we're looking for our students to really apply to between 5 and 6. We have students, obviously, this is your own personal choice, where you're going to apply potentially to fewer than that, or you're going to apply to a lot more than that. But these are some of the ways, this is how we would suggest categorizing that, regardless of the number. At this point, we have decided which schools we're going to apply to. For the purpose of this webinar, we're going to go with that 2 stretch schools, 2 great schools, and 1 safe school. But again, that is a personal decision for the student and their family on how many places you would like to apply. So as you've decided where you're going to apply, you need to start really compiling the information on the application requirements. And we can't stress this enough, start early. Start as early as possible because you need to know what all of these pieces are. You need to have time to be able to either write the essays or get letters of recommendation or finalize, the numbers of community service hours if that's a requirement. Whatever those requirements are, you want to give yourself plenty of time to be able to pull that together, so what you turn in, what your application looks like, is strong and you feel really good about that, as opposed to feeling really rushed at the end and feeling like it wasn't your best work. So some of the things that you're going to want to start looking at is, what type of application does that college or university require? Many of the colleges and universities have a common application, which is one where you fill it out one time and you're able to turn that in again and again. Same for the universal college application. Some of them are going to have their specific application process. So you're going to have to look at that. You're going to have to look at the types of essays and how many essays are required. These take some real thought and real time to put together these essays. The HIFA coach and the HIFA program is set up to be able to support students through this application process, specifically that essay process. And so the coach will work with the student on reviewing essays a couple of times, not 5 and 10 and 15 times, but really talking about, okay, what do you want to write about in this area? Okay, go and give your best shot, proofread it, look for, spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes and that type of thing, and turn it back into the coach. We have professional essay readers that we have on staff that are wonderful, wonderful staff members that give back great feedback to students on their essays that really help them to look even more polished than they already do. But these take time, and this is a really time-intensive process. So the earlier that you can start in identifying what those deadlines are, how many essays are there, and when those need to be turned in and what they need to look like, what's the length of them, you're going to really be doing yourself a favor. Some of the other things that you want to look at with application requirements are the application fees. Again, that's one of the main reasons that we want students to really narrow down where they're applying. Not only does that help them funnel their energy and focus into schools that they really want to attend, but it can get very costly with sometimes, $25 to $150 and anywhere kind of outside of those parameters for application fees. So if that's something that you would like to avoid, multiple application fees, start collecting that information on what is required for the different colleges and universities. Again, looking at what counts as official subject tests, ACT, SAT scores, and making sure you're going to get that back in time, especially for our students who may take the SAT. That usually is going to happen in March of your junior year, with the ACT falling in April of your junior year. Obviously, there's going to be a few exceptions here and there for that, depending upon where you're at, but you're also going to want to look at when the deadlines for those entrance exams are, so you can back that up. And if it's something that you are going to need to take again based on the minimum requirements or what that freshman profile looks like for the college or university, you're going to want to be able to do that as quickly as possible. So if you are going into a space where you are retaking that, find out when you're going to get your official results. Make sure that it matches with the deadlines for your college or university application the following year. If you take AP exams, if you're enrolled in AP classes or IB classes at your high school, when are the exams for those to potentially test out of college credit and those types of things, and when you're going to want to be able to put those into your transcript officially. So really looking at that, and when the college or university is going to need your high school transcript, the official version, or college transcript if you're doing either a dual program or something where you're taking those classes during your junior year, your senior year, or summers in between. So really looking at what all of those application requirements are, again, as early as possible, so you're not kind of blindsided by that. So again, this is something that your coach can help you on. We have templates for ways to keep this information and things for you to think about. So now we have an idea of what all of the requirements are for our college application or university application. We really need to know what those deadlines are. This is a huge piece that if we find out that the deadline is the next day, that's going to be a real scramble, and it really causes a lot of anxiety. And so really one ways that we start early, again, like looking at what those application requirements are, what those admissions requirements are, finding that out. Find out what those deadlines are. Students really are responsible for finding out what all of those deadlines are. A missed deadline can often result in missed opportunities. You may not be able to attend that college or university or receive financial aid based on a missed deadline. And when you're going through what these different deadlines are, if maybe, sometimes we get conflicting information on a website, will say one thing on one page, and on another page it may say something else, or we have a friend who goes to school there and they say X, Y, and Z. When in doubt, when there's any type of question, contact that specific institution as soon as possible. There, and write down who you talked to, the day that you talked to them, and catalog that as well to make sure that you have the best information for your deadline. It's also, as we're moving through the deadline and getting our application materials in, it's the student's responsibility to verify that everything that was sent was received. Oftentimes there's going to be some automation that is done on the college or university part. So you go in and you check your student account. You check to make sure that you get a receipt email, that type of thing. Make some deadlines in your own personal calendar if you use Google or any other type of calendar, within a week or so of things being put, sent into a college or university, put on your list, follow back up, make sure you got that email and start filing that away so you have that information. This is really a great place also where colleges and universities are moving to making notes in a student's profile once they have started the application process that there may be an official transcript missing, or they're looking for the entrance exam or subject tests or something along those lines. So this is your responsibility to go in and check this information and to see what, if anything, is missing. And again, if you have questions, give that institution a call, send them an email, reach out to them. It's your responsibility to be able to do that and go through that. There's going to be some different deadlines that you may come across. The application deadline, what the deadline is for your entrance exams. There may be supplemental materials that are going to include potentially those essays. They're going to include maybe some extracurricular activities. Your resume would fall under this category, as well as letters of recommendation from either jobs, supervisors that you have had, professors, advisors to extracurricular organizations, those types of things, which again, and I cannot stress this enough, finding out what those application requirements are really early on in the process is one of the smartest things you can do. Finding out what those deadlines are. And if maybe the deadlines aren't posted then, make a note for yourself to go back and check that again. And then looking again at the financial aid, applying for financial aid and what that looks like. Those deadlines are going to look differently potentially than what the application is going to look like, and then what that acceptance looks like. There's a couple of different things, and when you get to this point, I would encourage you to contact your HIFA coach. We can help you walk through if a college or university is offering early action and early decision. And so those are really things really quickly. Early action is students can apply early and find out without any penalty. They can find out if they're accepted, which then helps them decide if they're going to apply to other schools. An early decision is if a student really knows that they want to go there and a college or university is offering early decision and they apply, they're now bound to go and attend that college or university. Again, that's kind of a lot of information, and I would encourage that if that's ever something that is coming up for the student or their family, to have a really hard conversation, a really in-depth conversation with both the HIFA coach as well as the admissions office at that particular college or university. But really noting all of these deadlines so we're not like, oh my gosh, what happens, as we get closer to that end. Start early, check fees often, keep things up to date, keep them all for all of the schools that you're applying to, keep them all in one spot on an Excel spreadsheet, on however that's going to look best for you, so you know how to best utilize your time. The financial aid process is something that students can also start investigating in their junior year. Again, this is where you're going to want to start early and looking at what the different deadlines are for something specific to the college or university, and then some of these other federal programs. So the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. And this is typically out in August or October of any given year. So look at that. This is something that your HIFA coach can work with you on. We will review these and see anything that are kind of common mistakes, those types of things. The college scholarship services profile, the CSS profile, is also due around that time. These are things that you can start looking into in your junior year, and you're typically going to start filling out in the very beginning of your senior year. There's different state financial aid options. There's the specific, again, college and university financial aid options, and then there's scholarships. So again, the earlier you start identifying what is out there, looking at what the requirements are, what the deadlines are, what types of verifications and paperwork you may need to provide for these different things, that opportunities that are available to you, the earlier you can do this, the better. And because many of these are going to be things that you're actually starting in the beginning of the senior year, you're going to want to double check all of these things. But the more that you have information on this, the easier it's going to be. You're going to have all of your paperwork. You're going to have your tax information. You're going to have for different scholarships and grants, you're going to have your letters of recommendation and resume and verification of community service hours and whatever those pieces may be. It's again going to be such a service to you to really utilize this junior year to do your research. So when it's time to pull the trigger and apply to any of these different opportunities, you're going to be ready. Again, we want to relieve as much of that anxiety as possible. When it comes specifically to scholarships, many of those are not going to be available to students until their senior year, or they're not going to be available for them to start filling out. That is not true for every one of them. So again, start looking at what is available to your student, what is out there. That's something that the HIFA coaches also work with our students on. There's a lot of great resources, again, in Cooter and in Blueprint for this. We also work with students both in Canada and the US on doing kind of a search for, putting in the specific parameters that define who that student is to see what's available for them. And it's your responsibility, again, to start looking at what are those requirements for the scholarships and grants, when are those deadlines, and start pulling those materials together. So it can be very time intensive. It can pay off financially in the end, but can be very time intensive. It feels less intensive when we get our ducks in a row early on. We start finding out what is necessary and when it needs to get turned in. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit with us during this webinar. We hope that it was helpful. Again, that junior year, grade 11, really can be very pivotal in really gathering that information, figuring out what is necessary for any applications, when are those due, really starting to make some of these big decisions. So when grade 12 comes around, when senior year hits, we're ready to start doing those things. We really here at HIFA, we want to make sure that every student has a coach, that they have someone that they can talk to that has experience in the field. We want our students and our families to be successful, not only in finding something that is affordable for them, which is such a huge piece of it, We want them to find opportunities that are affordable. We want them to find opportunities that help pay and pick up for the cost of higher education. And we want our students to be passionate about what they are studying and then going to go into as a career. It just makes life so much better when we are passionate about what we do. It makes it a much more sustainable choice. So if there's ever anything that we can do, please feel free to reach out. You see the contact information here on the webinar. If you're already working with a HIFA consultant, they're a wonderful resource as well about this specific program. Again, we thank you for taking the time, investing the time on behalf of yourself or your student, depending on where you're coming from, and we look forward to working with you in the future.